Sankey charts can be useful for showing the inflows and outflows between two categories, but they typically are built with only one metric and compare only two categories. For this one, we'll create multiple selection options for the category and metric, which will expand the analysis options. We'll also use a workaround I found for making the selection text in a parameter and filter custom. That way we can display it larger. To start off creating the structure, I have 3 data sources. I'll drag the first data source, company size, into the view. Then I'll drag company size again underneath it to union it. This stacks the 2 data sources on top of each other, which duplicates the number of rows, which will give us that smooth curve for our Sankey. Next, I'll drag industry underneath to union it. And I'll do this twice. And then our third data source, region, I'll drag underneath to union it. I'll do this twice as well. So we've duplicated each of our data sources and stacked them all on top of each other. We have both revenue and quantity for all 3 data sources. So I'm going to select our 3 fields that are our categories, region, industry, and company size. Then I'll right-click and merge the mismatched fields. This will combine them all into one field. And it produces this field called table name, which either has the data source or the data source 1 value. So here you can see company size or company size 1, industry or industry 1. To create the Sankey, I'll start off on a new worksheet. And I'm going to go ahead and rename our industry, region, company size field to just be categories. And I'll pull table name into the rows so we can see the values. This differentiates the data source versus the union data source. Since one of the options for our Sankey chart will be able to switch between revenue and quantity, I'm going to create a parameter and I'll call it metric type. I'll change the data type to a string, and in the allowable values, I'll create a list with the values revenue and quantity. Then I can right-click and show the parameter on the worksheet. Since the other option in our Sankey chart is to switch between the target categories, I'll pull sheet into the filters. And this will give us our 3 category types, company size, industry, and region. So I'll just check off company size for now. I'll start off with all the formulas that are involved for a Sankey chart, and then we can build the structure of it. And I put these in the description if you just want to copy and paste. So I'll first create a calculative field for our points. I'll say if the table name contains the value 1, then 1, else 49, end. This will give us the start point 1 and the end point 49. Then I'll right-click on our points field, go to create, and choose bins. And I want the size of the bins to be 1, but all the other settings can stay the same. This points bin gives us intermediary points for a smoother curve. I'll create another calculated field for our normalized points. In here I'll type the index minus 25 in parentheses divided by 4. Then I'll create another calculated field where we'll include the metric. I'll call this rank 1 and type the running sum of the sum of our metric, which I'll start off with revenue. Then divide that by the total of the sum of our metric, which is revenue in this case. To give users the option to switch between revenue and quantity, instead of revenue, I'll type if the metric type equals revenue, then revenue. Else do the quantity. And I'll copy and paste this in a second part of our equation as well. This normalizes the values from 0 to 1 to ensure there's a smooth transition between the nodes. And it allows users to pick which metric they want to see in the Sankey chart. And while rank 1 is our start point or our source node, I need to duplicate the field and then I'll edit it and call it rank 2. This will be our endpoint or our target node. Then I'll create another calculated field for sigmoid, which is a mathematical function that gives it its S-shaped curve. I'll type 1 divided by 1 plus E raised to the negative norm points. And now we also need to create a calculated field for the curve. So I'll type in here rank 1 plus rank 2 minus rank 1 in parentheses times sigmoid in parentheses. And this last calculated field is optional, but if you want your Sankey paths to be proportionate to the values that they represent, you can create this size calculated field. In here I'll type window average of the sum of the metric. And I already have my condition for revenue versus quantity in my clipboard, so I'm just going to paste it. To create the structure, I'll remove table name from our rows. I'll start off by adding norm points into the columns, and I'll add points bin into the marks. That way we can right-click on our norm points, go to compute using, and choose the points bin. For the rows, I'll add our curve calculated field. Then I'll right-click and edit the table calculation. For rank 1, I'll compute using specific dimensions, and I'll check off points bin. Currently, we don't have our source or target category available in here, so I'm going to add segment to the marks and category to the marks. Then I'll check both of these off for rank 1. For the order, I'll do segment first since it's our source category. Then I'll do categories next because it's our target category. Then points bin. For rank 2, I'll switch our source category and our target category. So I'll put categories first since it's our target. Then I'll put segment since it's our source. And then I'll put the points bin. And for norm points, I just need the points bin checked off. And now we have the structure of a Sankey, but it's choosing circles, so I'm going to go to the marks and change it to a line. And I want the points bin to determine the path of the line. You can see on the right-hand side that there's a little hook on the end, so I'm going to edit the axis, and I'll give it a custom fixed range between -5 and 5. And for formatting, we no longer need the headers, so I'm going to go ahead and remove those. Then I'll format the worksheet and go to the Lines tab. I'll remove the grid lines, the zero lines, and the axis rulers. And now we're left with just the paths of the Sankey. And you can see when I change the metric type from revenue to quantity, the paths change. And I can also use the sheet filter to switch from company size to industry. There are more industry types than there are company sizes, and that's why there's more paths. But right now, all the size are the same width, even though they represent different values. So I'm going to move our size calculated field into the marks and change it from detail to a size. Then I'll right-click, go to compute using, and choose the points bin. So now paths that have larger values are thicker than the paths that have smaller values. While keeping the size proportionate to the values, you can use the size slider in the marks to increase or decrease the overall size of the paths. The next step will be to add some color to the Sankey. So first I'll change segment to a color. Then to add a gradients, I'll move norm points to the marks. Norm points is continuous right now, so if I try to change it to a color, it messes everything up. So I need to right-click and make it discrete. Then I can change it to a color. By using 2 discrete dimensions to color, we can get a distinct gradient for each segment. But you can see these are reversed right now. So Google Ads is our first value in our segment, yet it's at the bottom of the Sankey chart. So I'll right-click on segment and go to sort and choose descending order. And I'll do the same thing for categories. To choose which colors you want for the gradient, go to Edit Colors for the legend. You can load your own custom color palette, but I find with gradients it's just easier to use the ones that Tableau has, because you can assign the palette all at once. So for YouTube, I'm going to choose the purple palette since it'll be at the bottom. I'll click on the top one, then hit Shift, and choose the bottom one. So that way it selects all the YouTube data points. Then I can assign the entire palette. This will evenly space out every single color in the palette for us. So I'll go through and choose different color palettes, and then select all the values in a category and assign that color palette. And now we have a gradient Sankey chart that uses segment to determine the color of the gradients. You can also go to color in the marks and change the opacity of the paths. And I'm going to make these slightly bigger. So now that we have our Sankey chart, I want to add the bars that go on both ends. So I'll create a new worksheet, and I'll start with our source category, which is segment. To create the bars, I just need to pull segment into the marks and change it to a text. Then I'll pull our size calculated field into the rows. And because this size calculated field takes into account whether we're looking at revenue or quantity, no matter which is selected, it'll adjust the size of these bars to be segmented properly. Then for formatting, I'll remove the header, and I'll right-click to format the sheet. For the lines, I need to remove the axis rulers and the zero lines. And for the rows, I need to remove the grid lines. I want the color of our bars to match our Sankey chart, so I'm also going to drag segment into the marks and change it to a color. And then I'll edit the colors using the legend, and I'll choose the same colors as I have for my Sankey. I'm choosing these matching colors for our source category so that the paths of the Sankey look like they're flowing out of these bars. And I'll use the color in the marks to decrease the opacity to match the opacity I chose for the Sankey. I'm also going to make the labels a little bit bigger so that it's easier to read. So this will give us the bars on the left-hand side. To get the bars on the right-hand side, I'm going to duplicate this worksheet, and this will be for our target category, which is category. So for category, I'll change out our segment label with our category field. And we don't need it colored by segment anymore, so I'll remove that. Since our Sankey chart is colored by segment and not category, I'll use color in the marks to make these all a light gray. I'll change the opacity to 100%, and I'm going to give it a white border since that's what our background's going to be. And users will be able to filter by the category type, so we don't need all of the categories in here. So I'm going to go back to our Sankey worksheet, right-click on our filter for sheet, go to Apply to Selected Worksheet, and I'll check off all worksheets. And since it's set to company size right now, you can see it just has small, medium, and large values. And now that the structure is built, I'll create a new worksheet for our background. To create the background, I'll first create a calculated field called box with just 2 quotes in it. I'll move this to the marks and change it to text. You can see there's some text when I hover, so I'm just going to go to the tooltip and remove everything that's in there. Then I'll right-click inside the box, go to Annotate, Area, and hit OK. And I want this to fill the entire view. I'll right-click Format in our box and change the shading to 100% white. And I'll make the corners more rounded. Then I'll right-click Format on an area that's not in our box so I can change the shading of our worksheet to a gray. And once I have that centered, I'll create a dashboard and bring our background worksheet in. And I'll hide the title, go to Layout, and change the positioning to 0, 0, and then the width and height to the size of our dashboard. Back on the Dashboard tab, I'll bring in our Sankey worksheet and hide the title, get rid of everything that we don't need, but keep our metric type parameter. Then I'll click on the Sankey, go to the down arrow, filters, and I'll add our sheet filter. Then I'll add our source segment worksheet, hide the title, and get rid of the legend. And I'll add our target category worksheet and hide the title. Then I can resize these so they look like little bookends. But you can see there's a little white space between the bookend and the Sankey chart. To fix this, I'll right-click Format on our bar worksheet, and I'll change the shading to None. And I'll do this for our other bar as well. And now that I have our Sankey and bars where I want them, I'm going to use a workaround I found to increase the size of the text within our parameter and filter. So first I'll make our sheet filter a multi-value dropdown. You can see the default size is not very large, and we have a lot of real estate to work with on the screen. And even when I format the filter to make the body of the text larger, it doesn't change the size of the selection text in the box. So first I'll create a new worksheet for our metric type parameter. Then I'll edit the title of our worksheet, remove what's in there, go to Insert, and choose our parameter for metric type. Then I'll create another worksheet for a category type filter. To get the sheet in here, I'm just going to pull it into the marks temporarily. Then I'll go to our Sankey worksheet, right-click on our filter, go to Apply to Selected Worksheets, and choose our category type filter. And now when I go back to that worksheet, you can see it's filtered for that. So I'll remove sheet from the marks, edit the title of the worksheet, remove what's in there, go to Insert, and choose our sheet filter. So the title of our worksheet will display whatever in the value for that filter, which right now is company size. Back on the dashboard, I'll pull these two new worksheets in. The title of these worksheets is going to act as our selection text, which will allow us to change the size to anything we want. So I'll remove the titles that we currently have for our filter and our parameter, and instead we'll place these on top of them. But right now you can still see what's behind it, so I'm going to format our worksheet title, and I'll change the shading to a gray. And I'll do this for our other title as well. I'll move them in the right place so that we have company size above and revenue underneath. And I want the actual filter and parameters little arrow to stick out on the right-hand side. And once I get those somewhat positioned, I'm going to click on an area that's not in our box. I'll go to Annotate, Area, and hit OK. And I'll do this twice so we have two boxes for our filter and our parameter. Then I'll drag these so they surround our filter and our parameter. Then I'll right-click and format in our little box. I'll change the shading to a gray. And I like to use the annotated areas so that I can make the corners rounded. And I'll also do this for our parameter. And after I get these positioned where I want them, I'm going to right-click and edit the title. I'll change these to Tableau medium so they stick out a little more. And while we already changed the body of the text for the filter, we still need to do it for the parameter. So first I'm going to see what size we changed the filter text to. And then I'll click the down arrow for the parameter, format the parameter, and change the body of the text for the parameter to the same size. And now when I go into presentation mode, you can see what the filter and the parameter will actually look like. But now when I hover over one of the paths, you can see there's a lot of information in there that we don't need. So I'll go to the Sankey worksheet and edit the tooltip. And all I want to keep in here is the segment field. Then I'll put an arrow I copy pasted from the internet, and then the categories. and I can remove everything else that isn't the size. Size will represent the values in this case. But we have two metrics that we're looking at, either revenue or quantity, and they should both have their own number format. I want the tooltip to have a $sign when revenue is represented by the paths, and no $sign when it's quantity. To do this, I'm going to duplicate our size calculated field. Then I'll edit it, and I'll call it size-revenue. And all I need to do here is replace our quantity with null. That way it either gives the value of revenue if revenue is selected, or nothing if revenue is not selected. So I'll do the same process for quantity and duplicate our size-revenue calculated field. I'll call this one size-quantity, and everywhere we have revenue, I'll replace with quantity. And to use these in the tooltip, I need to bring these both into the marks. Then I'll edit the tooltip, and I'll click on Insert, and bring in both the size quantity and the size revenue fields. You can see it currently says none in the preview, but when we actually use the Sankey, it'll have nothing there. And right now there's actually nothing there because we need to right-click on our size quantity field in the marks, go to Compute Using, and choose the points bin. And I'll do this for our size revenue field as well. And right now when we hover over, we can see the revenue amount, but not the quantity. And that's because revenue is selected in our metric type parameter. To add a $sign to the revenue, I'll right-click on our size revenue calculated field, go to Default Properties, and choose Number Format. And here I'll make it a custom currency with 0 decimals. And right now revenue is selected in our metric type parameter, so you can see a $sign when I hover over the path in the Sankey. But if I switch the metric type to quantity, you can see that quantity does not have a $sign in front of it. And now our tooltip is dynamic, and it doesn't just update the value for which metric type is selected, but it also updates the number format for which metric type is selected. And the last thing I want to do is add a highlight action. This way, when I hover over one of the paths, it shows that path highlighted and the bars it belongs to. And when I hover over one of the bars, it shows all the paths that come in or out of that bar. So I'll go to Dashboard, Actions, and I'll add a highlight action. For the source sheet, I want to check off the Sankey and the 2 bar worksheets. And I'll have those 3 selected for the target sheets as well. I want the action to run on hovering. And for the selected fields, I just want categories and segments selected. And now when I hover over a path in our Sankey, I can see the segment it's coming from and the category it's going to. And if I hover over a segment, I can see all the paths that come out of that segment. And when I hover over one of our categories, I can see all the bars that come into that category.